In May of 1987, a farm worker named Moises Aguirre Calzada was cutting an irrigation trench through an apple orchard in East Wenatchee, Washington. His shovel struck something hard, and the ends of a stone blade came up out of the dirt. He kept digging by hand and pulled out 24 more. The largest spear points anyone has ever found in North America. That orchard is in America, and it is far from the strangest thing ever pulled out of American ground. That cache makes this list. So do 11 others. A carved stone egg drilled clean through by a machine that did not exist when it was buried. A lead sword from the Arizona desert with a dinosaur engraved on the blade. A forgery that sat in the Smithsonian's own collection for 125 years. Stick with us to the end, because number 1 is a mastodon tusk standing upright in the dirt under a San Diego freeway. This channel digs into the forgotten and the strange. Subscribe if that is your kind of thing. Today, we are counting down 12 ancient tools hidden across America that shouldn't exist. Number 12, the Koso artifact. The half-million-year-old spark plug, 6 miles northeast of Olancha, California. The Koso Range rises out of the Mojave above the dry white bed of Owens Lake. On February 13th, 1961, 3 people who ran a rock shop in Olancha came back off that hillside with a sack of what they believed were geodes. The next day, Mike Mikesell destroyed a nearly new diamond saw blade, cutting one of them open. Inside was not a crystal cavity. It was a hard white cylinder resembling porcelain, with a 2mm shaft of bright magnetic metal running through its center. A geologist reportedly told them the nodule would have taken 500,000 years to form. That assessment was never published. For 3 decades, the object circulated as proof of a lost civilization, or of time travel. Then, 2 researchers sent X-rays of it to the spark plug collectors of America. Their president identified it on site, a 1920s champion plug, the kind fitted to a Ford Model T. The rock around it was never a geode. It was a crust of the plug's own rust. 60 years of mystery, closed by a hobbyist club that simply knew what it was looking at. Number 11, the Lake Winnipesaukee Mystery Stone, the egg nobody can explain. The New Hampshire Historical Society sells t-shirts of an object it cannot identify. By their own account, it draws more public inquiries than anything else they own. In 1872, workers digging a fence post hole in Meredith, New Hampshire, brought up a lump of clay from roughly 6 feet down. Inside was a carved stone egg about 4 inches long, 2.5 inches at its widest, weighing a little over a pound. The material is quartzite or myelinite, a rock type not native to the state. Its surface carries a face, an ear of corn, a teepee, inverted arrows, a crescent, dots, and a spiral. A hole runs clean through it, end to end, bored from both directions with different sized bits, 1/8 of an inch at the top, 3/8 at the bottom. That bore is too clean for hand drilling. Somebody with a machine made it. The businessman who hired those workers, Seneca Ladd, put it in a glass case in a bank lobby and left it there. He never sold it, never toured it, never wrote a book about it. Which leaves the strangest part. Somebody built an elaborate object, packed it in clay, buried it, and then said nothing at all. Number 10. The Tucson Artifacts, the Roman colony in the Sonoran Desert. Silver Bell Road runs northwest out of Tucson, through saguaro and creosote, past the ruins of old lime kilns that were used to plaster adobe houses. On September 13th, 1924, a man named Charles Manier stopped at one of those kilns and pulled a lead cross roughly 46 centimeters long out of the hard ground. It was 2 pieces fastened together. When he pried them apart, there was Latin engraved on the inner faces. Manier took it to a Latin professor at the University of Arizona, who translated it without difficulty. His friend Thomas Bent, a lawyer, discovered the land was unowned and bought it. Over the next 6 years, 31 lead objects came out of that site. 8 crosses, 9 swords, 13 spear points, and 1 fan-shaped piece. They described a Roman Jewish military expedition and a settlement in Arizona somewhere around the year 800, The excavation ran with university faculty present and made the New York Times. The problem was everything that wasn't there. No pottery, no structures, no burials, no refuse. A colony leaves rubbish. This one left 31 ceremonial weapons and nothing else. The Latin, when checked, tracked textbook phrasing available to any Tucson student in 1924. And someone had engraved a dinosaur on one of the swords. A single sauropod undid a decade of Latin scholarship. Bent defended the find for the rest of his life. His son held the collection for another 60 years before handing it to a museum. Number 9. The Michigan Relics. 3,000 fakes, 3,000. That is roughly how many ancient objects came out of Michigan soil across 16 counties over 30 years, and every one of them was manufactured by the man who kept finding them. It began in October 1890, when a sign painter named James Scotford reported unearthing a large inscribed earthen casket while digging post holes in central Michigan. What followed were cups, amulets, tools, pipes, coins, figurines, and tablets in clay, copper, and slate, all carrying religious-looking symbols and pseudo-cuneiform script. The most common tablet scenes ran the story of the flood in sequence. The drowning, the ark, the dove, the animals unloading, the rainbow. There was a reason this sold. The public wanted an answer to who built America's burial mounds, and a large audience actively wanted that answer to be a lost Near Eastern civilization rather than the native nations who actually built them. That belief was not innocent. It was used to justify taking land. By 1907, Scotford had partnered with Daniel Soper, a former Michigan Secretary of State who had resigned after being accused of embezzlement. That November, the Detroit News reported the pair were selling copper crowns supposedly taken from the heads of prehistoric kings, along with copies of Noah's Diary. In 1911, a University of Chicago professor declared the whole business fake in print. That same year, Scotford's stepdaughter signed an affidavit saying she had watched him make the objects and that he had threatened her life when she said so. The slate matched milled roofing tile then produced in Detroit. The copper showed modern smelting and hot rolling. Neither man ever confessed. Both died in the 1920s, and no further relics were ever found. The people who paid for it were not those two. It was every genuine site torn open by looters chasing the next one. Number 8. The Bat Creek Stone. The Forgery inside the Smithsonian. Here's what makes this one different. Every other fraud on this list was found by an amateur on his own ground. This one was excavated by a Smithsonian field agent on a Smithsonian dig and entered the National Collection as genuine. On February 14, 1889, John Emmert was working Mound 3 of the Tipton Group, near the mouth of Bat Creek in Loudoun County, Tennessee. The mound held 9 burials. Emmert documented a small inscribed tablet, roughly 8 by 13 centimeters, lying partly beneath a skull and jaw. He wrote to his supervisor Cyrus Thomas the next day. Thomas published it in 1890 and called the characters, in his words, beyond question letters of the Cherokee alphabet, a writing system invented in the early 19th century. That misidentification is what kept the stone alive, because the official reading was so plainly wrong. Later scholars felt free to substitute their own. In the 1960s, 2 researchers noticed that inverted, the characters resembled ancient Semitic script. In 1971, a Semitic languages scholar declared it Paleo-Hebrew of roughly the 1st or 2nd century. The evidence ran the other way. The 2 brass bracelets found with it dated to the 18th or 19th century. Emmert had a documented drinking problem, had been dismissed once, and was campaigning hard for permanent employment. And in 2004, 2 researchers matched the inscription to an illustration in an 1870 Masonic reference book. In 2014, the Smithsonian's own Department of Anthropology issued a statement calling it a forgery. Then, they kept it, filed with the institution's other known fakes, doing the exact opposite of what it was made to do. Number 7. The Kensington Runestone. Minnesota's most durable lie. Douglas County, Minnesota is glacial lake country. Farmland, aspen, oak, and long open wind. In the autumn of 1898, a Swedish immigrant named Olof Öhman was clearing land on his farm near Kensington when he turned up a 200-pound slab of gray sandstone tangled in tree roots. His son Edward noticed the markings on it. The inscription describes 8 Gotalanders and 22 Northmen on an exploration journey west from Vinland. It records them returning from a day's fishing to find 10 of their men dead and red with blood. It is dated 1362, 130 years before Columbus. Rune experts at Northwestern and the University of Minnesota examined it almost immediately and judged it a fake. The runes and dialect forms track 19th century understanding of medieval Scandinavian writing rather than actual 14th century usage. That has never really changed. What changed was who owned the argument. A Norwegian-American writer named Hjalmar Holland acquired the stone and defended it for over 50 years. Öhman conveyed his own interest in it to the Minnesota Historical Society for $10. Holland sold it to Alexandria businessmen for $2,000. The stone has since been displayed at the Smithsonian and at the 1965 New York World's Fair, and the Minnesota Historical Society Library now holds more than 40 titles arguing about it. Alexandria built its identity on it regardless. There is a Runestone museum, a memorial park opened in 1951, and a giant replica whose base weighs more than 200 times the original slab. Öhman never profited and never confessed. His descendants have spent generations as either the heirs of a discovery or the heirs of a liar with no way to find out which. Number 6. The Topper Site Lithics, 50,000 years or nothing at all. For most of the 20th century, American archaeologists did not dig below the Clovis layer because everyone knew there was nothing there, which meant nobody ever checked. Albert Goodyear of the University of South Carolina was surveying church sources in 1981 when a local man named Topper led him to a hillside above the Savannah River in Allendale County. It was an ancient quarry. Prehistoric people came here for the chert nodules and napped them into tools, including fluted Clovis points. By the 1990s, it was one of the best documented Clovis sites in the country. Goodyear believed the Clovis first model himself. Then, Monteverde in Chile forced the discipline to accept that people had reached South America first. If they were in Chile, they came through here. So in 1998, he did the simple thing. He kept digging. A meter below the Clovis level, he found stone tools from soils later dated between 16 and 20,000 years old. That material has largely held up. Then, in 2004, he brought in a backhoe and went 4 meters down through the Pleistocene terrace into a charcoal-stained layer that also held flaked stone. Radiocarbon dating of burnt plant remains from that layer returned ages of around 50,000 years. That number is not accepted. The dispute is whether the deepest pieces were struck by a human hand or broken by nature, and this is the hardest possible place to settle it. The site is a chert quarry. The raw material of the argument is lying everywhere by the ton, which is exactly why finding more of it proves nothing. He is still digging. The ground is still refusing to say. We opened this video with that apple orchard in Washington, and we are getting to it shortly. If you have made it this far, drop a thumbs up. It genuinely helps these get found. And tell us in the comments which of the 6 hoaxes you think was the most convincing at the time. Number 5. The Miller Lancelate Point, the spear point under the beer cans. In 1955, a Pennsylvania farmer named Albert Miller found a stone knife under a sandstone overhang on land his family had worked since 1795. He told almost nobody for 18 years. That was not secrecy, it was calculation. Miller understood that if word got out, the shelter would be stripped by looters, which is precisely what happened to comparable sites across that era. His restraint is the only reason Meadowcroft is scientifically usable today. In 1973, he showed the knife to James Adovasio of the University of Pittsburgh, and excavation began. What came out was a sequence intact from top to bottom. Fire pits stacked on fire pits, occupation on occupation, the longest continuous run of human habitation known anywhere in the Americas, reaching down through the Clovis horizon and then straight past it. The deepest cultural layer has been radiocarbon dated to at least 16,000 years before present. A burnt and heavily cut deer antler base returned a date of 16,175 years, plus or minus 975. A wooden bypoint from the very base of those deposits dates to roughly 15,000. And the point that came out of that layer was wrong. It was unfluted, made on local Cross Creek chert. Not early Clovis, but a different technology entirely. Alongside it sat prismatic blades of Onondaga and Flint Ridge chert, flint from Ohio, jasper from eastern Pennsylvania, marine shell from the Atlantic coast. These were people who moved. Adovasio then spent 4 decades defending the dates against the charge that Pennsylvania's coal-bearing sediments had contaminated his samples with dead carbon. Here's the part that lands hardest. Before any of this, the Rockshelter was a local teenage drinking spot, in use into the 1970s. Kids were sitting around fires directly on top of the oldest continuously occupied site in North America. 16,000 years apart, and both groups picked the same rock for the same reason. Number 4. The East Wenatchee Clovis Cache, the biggest spear points ever found under an apple orchard. The largest Clovis point known to science is 9 1/1500 inches long, napped from white agate, translucent when you hold it up. Before this cache surfaced, the largest anyone had ever recorded measured around 6. We opened with how it was found. Moises Aguirre Calzada and Mark Mickles trenching for irrigation pipe on Grant Road in East Wenatchee, Washington, on the 27th of May, 1987. Aguirre dug 24 points out with his hands. They were first mistaken for recent native tools, until a local amateur archaeologist recognized them as Clovis. A National Park Service archaeologist named the site. The state cataloged it as 45-DO-432. What lay in that hole was not a kill site and not a dropped toolkit. The points were stacked tightly together, uniform, several far too large and too fine for any practical hunting use, and placed alongside bibeveled rods of carved mammoth or mastodon bone, some of them incised. Those rods have been read as hafting wedges for the enormous points, or as segments of a ceremonial shaft. Volcanic ash beneath the artifacts, apparently from a Glacier Peak eruption, dated the deposit to around 13,200 years ago. It remains the only intact Clovis site ever found in Washington, and the first Clovis cache ever recovered in place. Then, the human part started. In October 1990, members of the Colville Confederated Tribes demonstrated at the excavation, concerned it was disturbing an ancestral burial ground. Work stopped for weeks and resumed only on a limited basis. In 1992, the Washington State Historical Society purchased the digging rights, and the site was closed to excavation for 15 years. The trench was refilled. A concrete slab was poured over it. The ground went back into commercial fruit production. Somewhere under those trees, the finest blades in the entire Clovis record are lying exactly where somebody set them down. Number 3. The Old Copper Complex. The metal age that started in Wisconsin and then stopped. Around 85 centuries ago, beside Eagle Lake in what is now Wisconsin, somebody hammered a conical projectile point, about 10 centimeters long, out of pure copper. It is the oldest reliably dated metal artifact of its kind in the Americas, and it makes the people who made it among the first metalworkers on Earth. Not the first in America, the first, full stop, or close to it. The oldest comparable object from the Middle East is a copper pendant estimated at 8,700 years. The Great Lakes have something almost nowhere else does. Native copper lying on the surface in usable, nearly pure lumps, scattered by glaciers along the southern shore of Lake Superior and as far south as Illinois. Everywhere else on the planet, metallurgy required smelting, a technology that had to be invented. Here, it did not. A person could pick up a nugget and hit it. So they did. They cold hammered it, and they independently worked out annealing, reheating the metal so repeated blows would not crack it. That is real metallurgical knowledge arrived at from first principles. They made axes, adzes, knives, awls, fishhooks, and harpoons. They mined lode and fissure deposits with stone hammers, and the pits they dug survive on the Keweenaw Peninsula and on Isle Royale. A 2021 study reanalyzed 53 radiocarbon dates and concluded the tradition emerged at least 9,500 years ago and peaked between 7 and 5,000. Before radiocarbon existed, archaeologists had it pegged at around 1000 BC. On one artifact from Vilas County, Wisconsin, the cordage that bound the copper to its shaft is still attached. It dates to over 4,000 years ago. The rope survived because the corroding copper poisoned everything that would have eaten it. Then, around 3,000 years ago, they largely stopped. Laboratory tests on replica copper arrowheads found they performed about the same as stone ones. And copper is heavier and takes far longer to make. They ran the numbers, decided the new technology was not better, and put it down. Number 2. The Folsom point. The Folsom, the cowboy who died 5 years too early. On August 27, 1908, a storm broke over Johnson Mesa in northeastern New Mexico and sent floodwater tearing down Wild Horse Arroyo. It devastated the town of Folsom and cut a fresh wall into the gully. A few days later, a ranch foreman named George McJunkin rode out to check fence lines and saw large bones eroding from that new cut, about 10 feet down. McJunkin had been born into slavery in Midway, Texas, in 1851 and had come west in 1868. He was self-taught as a naturalist, and he knew immediately that those bones were neither cattle nor modern bison. He deduced correctly that they came from an extinct variety. Then, he spent 14 years trying to get a single scientist to come and look. The problem was never the evidence. American archaeology had a gatekeeper, Alish Hrdlicka of the Smithsonian, who insisted humans had reached the Americas only recently and treated every contrary find as sloppy digging or outright fraud. Careers ended over it. A black cowboy in one of the emptiest counties in the country reporting Ice Age bones met structural indifference. In 1918, he and the ranch owner's teenage son dug out bones and a fluted lance point and sent them to Denver. Nothing happened. He died in 1922. That December, a Raton blacksmith and a local banker finally visited the site. In January 1926, they carried bones into the Colorado Museum of Natural History, where a curator identified them as bison antiquus. Excavation began that year and exposed roughly 30 extinct bison. And because Hrdlicka had specifically accused people of planting artifacts, the museum director gave an order: the moment anything is found, stop, leave it in the ground, and bring witnesses. In the summer of 1927, the crew found a spear point sitting in place between the ribs of an extinct bison. Leading archaeologists attending the first Pecos conference, a day's train ride away, came and confirmed it. They cut the block of earth out whole. It is still on display in Denver. Reddish clay, a few bone fragments, one small amber flint point between two ribs, in exactly the position a hunter left it. He was right for 14 years and never once got to hear anybody say so. Number 1. The Cerutti Mastodon hammerstones. The tools that are 116,000 years too old. You do not walk to this one. You drive to it, on the freeway that destroyed the rest of it. Suburban San Diego County, State Route 54. 6 lanes of ordinary traffic that never stops. There is no wilderness, no gravel road, no journey at all. You take an exit, and you are standing on it. The sound is engine noise and tire hum, close and constant. And there is nothing in any direction to tell you that anything happened here. A few miles away, in Balboa Park, there is a room of about 300 square feet, where you can see what came out of the ground. In November 1992, a field paleontologist named Richard Cerutti was doing legally mandated monitoring on a highway expansion. the most routine work in the discipline, when he saw bone in the cut. A team from the San Diego Natural History Museum excavated the site across roughly 5 months that winter. What they found was a mastodon that had been taken apart in a way natural processes do not produce. The fragile ribs were intact. The dense limb bones were shattered. Femoral shaft fragments were clustered around a single large cobble. The 2 detached femur heads were broken in exactly the same manner and set down side by side. One of the tusks was standing vertically in the sediment, driven upright, as if someone had marked the spot, and lying among the bones were 5 large stones, hammerstones and anvils carrying negative flake scars, deep cracks, and impact damage, sitting in fine-grained sand that had no business holding rocks that size. Then, the site sat for 22 years, because in 1993, there was no way to date it that anyone would have believed. In 2014, radiometric dating established that the bones, still fresh when they were broken, were roughly 130,000 years old, give or take about 9,000. The findings were published in Nature in 2017. The scientific consensus places human arrival in the Americas between 19 and 26,000 years ago. This is 100,000 years earlier than that. It is tens of thousands of years earlier than most accepted modern human sites outside Africa entirely. The claim is fiercely disputed, and the museum's own lead scientist has said plainly that one site does not make a paradigm. His response was to ask other researchers to go back and look at the places everybody had written off for being too old. No hominin remains were ever found. Whoever knelt in that sand and swung those stones, we have no idea what they were. And the tusk is still standing upright in the photographs, under 6 lanes of traffic that have not slowed down once. There are more of these than would fit. Inscribed stones, buried caches, and quarry floors still being argued over right now. Our favorite is the Old Copper Complex, because it is the only story here where the mystery is not how they invented something, but why they decided to stop. Which one caught you off guard, and which object should have been on this list? Tell us in the comments, subscribe, and we will keep going.